The early days of the American air campaign over Europe were fraught with logistical challenges and strategic uncertainty. The United States Army Air Forces, USAF, entered the European theater with an unwavering commitment to daylight precision bombing. This doctrine was based on the belief that the superior northern bomb sight would allow unescorted bombers to hit critical industrial targets with surgical accuracy. The Germans, however, maintained a strong and disciplined air defense, including formidable day fighter squadrons and heavy flak concentrations. Initial American losses were staggering, quickly forcing a reassessment of the daylight-only strategy. Even as the Americans struggled in the daytime, they occasionally attempted night raids, often with disastrously inaccurate results. These early night efforts were rudimentary, uncoordinated, and lacked any reliable system for target identification in the darkness. German military leadership watched these scattered night attacks with a palpable sense of relief and professional disdain. They had already mastered night defense against the British Royal Air Force, and the American attempt seemed amateurish by comparison. The Luftwaffe's night fighter arm, known as the Nachtjagd, was highly experienced and focused its attention almost exclusively on the more immediate threat posed by the British bomber stream. German commanders simply failed to appreciate the immense industrial and strategic potential latent within the rapidly expanding American bomber force. Their early confidence was rooted in a sense of technical superiority and a dismissal of the American capacity to adapt to the specialized challenges of night warfare. This misjudgment would eventually prove to be a catastrophic strategic error, costing them critical months of preparation. The first American attempts at night bombing were largely ineffective and often described as more of a nuisance than a genuine threat. Crews were still learning the complexities of formation flying and navigation even during the day, making operations after sundown exceedingly difficult. The core problem was the complete absence of a reliable and repeatable method for accurately locating a target in total darkness. The northern bomb sight, so celebrated for its purported precision, was completely useless when the target city was obscured by night or cloud cover. American bombers would often drop their payloads miles from the intended industrial center, scattering bombs harmlessly over open fields. These wildly inaccurate raids resulted in minimal damage to German war production and civilian infrastructure. German intelligence reports mocked the results, highlighting the wide dispersal of the bomb craters and the near-zero impact on vital factories. This pattern of failure reinforced the German High Command's conviction that the Americans were fundamentally incapable of effective night operations. The lack of success was demoralizing for the American air crews, who faced the same dangers as daylight operations with none of the strategic reward. Pilots and navigators were forced to rely on dead reckoning, celestial navigation, and guesswork, all methods prone to massive errors over hostile territory. The early night attacks therefore served only to embolden the German defense, convincing them to allocate minimal resources to an American night countermeasure. It was a period of costly experimentation that demonstrated a critical technological and doctrinal gap the USAF urgently needed to close. The initial scattered raids were the necessary, if painful, foundation upon which future, more sophisticated night strategy would be built. The German response to the American night campaign was characterized by a dangerous mix of arrogance and overconfidence. Experienced Luftwaffe commanders, honed by years of battling the Royal Air Force, saw the American efforts as a poor imitation of British tactics. They believed the Americans were too reliant on technology and too inexperienced in the brutal realities of night combat over continental Europe. Official reports frequently minimized the damage inflicted, often concluding that the American night attacks were simply nuisance raids designed to harass and annoy. This perception led to a critical strategic neglect of the USAAF's potential for future night operations. Resources were consistently prioritized toward fighting the British on moonlit nights and the American daylight forces. German defense planning operated on the fundamental assumption that the USAF would never abandon its preferred daylight doctrine. This complacency was a direct result of the early American inaccuracy and the German failure to predict doctrinal shifts. High-ranking officials, including Hermann Göring, openly expressed their disdain for the scattered bomb patterns and the seemingly aimless nature of the raids. They viewed the American airmen as competent in daylight but entirely lost and ineffective once darkness fell over the Reich. This institutional skepticism blinded them to the rapid technological and procedural innovations occurring on the Allied side. The German military intelligence apparatus focused on defending against what had happened, not what was about to happen. Their scoffing was a psychological and strategic shield that would ultimately leave a gaping hole in the defenses of their industrial heartland. The British Royal Air Force, RAF, had already fought and won the battle for night supremacy over German airspace. After suffering devastating daylight losses in the early war, the RAF had been forced to transition to mass night area bombing. The British understood the critical need for specialized navigation to overcome the immense difficulty of finding targets in the dark. This understanding led to the formation of the RAF Pathfinder Force in 1942, a revolutionary concept in aerial warfare. Pathfinder crews flew ahead of the main bomber stream, locating the target using cutting-edge radar and celestial fixes. Once over the target, they would drop brilliant flares, known as target indicator flares, which marked the aiming point for the following main force. The success of the RAF Pathfinders proved that night bombing could be a devastatingly accurate strategic tool. The American Air Command, deeply invested in precision bombing, initially resisted adopting the British model of area bombing. However, the persistent failure of their own independent night raids began to erode their doctrinal rigidity. The effectiveness of the RAF's illuminated targets was an undeniable military reality that the USAF could not ignore. American planners quickly realized that the method of illumination was key, even if the scale of the resulting attack would need to be adapted. The Pathfinder system became the blueprint for the USAF to transition from scattered, ineffective raids to concentrated, powerful night strikes. The British pioneers showed the Americans exactly how to bridge the navigation gap, providing the foundational knowledge and technology for the eventual American success. The USAAF's doctrine was deeply rooted in the moral and strategic ideal of precision bombing. Daylight attacks were intended to target specific factories, power stations, or oil refineries, avoiding civilian casualties. This commitment to precision was both a public relations stance and a military necessity to disrupt specific parts of the German war machine. The move to night operations, even a successful one, inherently threatened this core principle due to the difficulty of pinpoint aiming in the dark. The famed Norden bomb sight, the supposed instrument of American precision, was entirely dependent on a visual sighting of the target. As the war progressed and weather conditions often obscured German targets, the effectiveness of daylight raids began to wane. Clouds and the simple reality of night made visual aiming impossible, forcing American strategists to confront a fundamental contradiction. They needed the cover of darkness to survive the German air defense, but they needed clear visibility to achieve their stated precision goal. The solution lay in technology that could see through the clouds and the night, effectively replacing the human eye. The adaptation of the Pathfinder model allowed the USAF to retain a semblance of precision by concentrating the main force's bombs into a tightly marked target area. This marked area, though defined by flares, still represented a more focused attack than the aimless scattering of earlier attempts. The dilemma was ultimately solved by trading a perfect, visual precision for a highly effective, radar-assisted, illuminated area precision. This strategic compromise allowed the American 8th Air Force to maintain its relentless bombing schedule regardless of the time of day or the prevailing weather conditions. The concept of the Pathfinder was born from the realization that successful bombing hinged entirely on navigation, not just the skill of the main bomber crews. It acknowledged that only a small, highly specialized group could dedicate the necessary time to master the new and complex navigational aids. The Pathfinder units would fly in the vanguard of the attack, enduring the initial, unsuppressed defenses of the target area. Their mission was singular: to identify the aiming point, mark it with flares, and communicate the attack parameters to the incoming main force. This division of labor was revolutionary, as it freed the majority of the bomber force to focus purely on flying formation and dropping bombs on the visible markers. The Pathfinders were equipped with the most advanced technologies, including early forms of radar and highly accurate timing devices. Their personnel were the most experienced and skilled navigators, pilots, and bombardiers the USAF could muster. The entire system was designed for redundancy, with multiple Pathfinder aircraft marking the same target from different angles to ensure the markers were not extinguished or blown away. This strategic innovation immediately addressed the chief flaw of early American night bombing: the inability to locate and fix the target. By centralizing the navigation challenge, the USAF made the bombing process repeatable, regardless of the individual skill level of the main force crews. The adoption of the Pathfinder method signaled the maturation of the American strategic bombing effort in the European theater. It was a direct and necessary response to the German night defenses that had previously made accurate, concentrated night attacks impossible. The success of the Pathfinders was entirely dependent on the rapid deployment and mastery of new, complex electronic warfare technology. One of the most crucial tools was the H-2X radar, an American adaptation of the British H-2S system, capable of generating a map-like image of the ground below. This ground-mapping radar was invaluable because it could penetrate cloud cover and darkness, allowing navigators to identify coastal outlines and major city features. The H-2X became known informally as Mickey, and its successful operation required intense training and a high degree of interpretative skill. Another essential technological element was the specialized pyrotechnics used for target marking. These included high-intensity, colored flares and incendiary canisters designed to burn brightly for a predetermined time, clearly defining the aiming point. Radio navigation aids like G and Oboe, also of British origin, provided complementary systems for guiding the Pathfinders to their general target vicinity. These devices helped the lead aircraft achieve unprecedented levels of accuracy in their flight paths over occupied Europe. The integration of these various technologies represented a significant logistical and operational challenge for the USAF. It required the establishment of specialized maintenance units and training schools dedicated solely to electronic navigation and bombing. The technological leap provided the Pathfinders with the sensory capability they needed to see what the main force could not. This advanced equipment transformed the air battle from a random, site-based endeavor into a methodical, electronically guided military operation. The training regimen for the American Pathfinders was notoriously rigorous, selecting only the finest aircrews for this elite and dangerous duty. Candidates were typically drawn from crews who had already completed a significant number of combat missions and demonstrated exceptional navigational prowess. The psychological profile of a Pathfinder required a rare combination of cool technical skill and aggressive, unflappable determination. Pathfinder crews had to master the intricacies of the H-2X radar, learning to accurately interpret the often ambiguous returns displayed on the scope. They practiced endlessly over areas of the United States that mimicked the target geography of Germany, refining their radar mapping skills. The training emphasized the precise coordination required to drop the target flares at the exact moment and location necessary to bracket the aiming point. Unlike the main force, Pathfinders often had to fly alone or in small, exposed groups, facing the full fury of the unsuppressed German defenses. They were literally the first ones in and the last ones out of the most dangerous airspace over the Rhine. The training instilled a deep sense of mission importance, emphasizing that the success of hundreds of following aircraft depended on their accuracy. This highly specialized unit also had to be proficient in complex communication codes to quickly relay target conditions and flare adjustments to the incoming bomber stream. The intensity of their preparation reflected the high-stakes nature of their role in the entire strategic bombing campaign. These were the men who would literally pave the way with fire for the rest of the 8th Air Force, lighting the darkness for devastation to follow. The first large-scale American Pathfinder missions marked an immediate and profound shift in the effectiveness of USAF night bombing. The new tactic saw Pathfinder B-17s and B-24s racing ahead of the main force, their crews intently focused on their radar scopes and timing instruments. Upon reaching the target area, the Pathfinders would unleash a cascade of pyrotechnic markers, transforming the dark ground into a brilliantly illuminated bullseye. The flares would often be dropped in specific color patterns, indicating the primary aiming point, and secondary markers for course corrections. The sight of a German city suddenly and intensely illuminated was a terrifying new experience for both the defenders and the civilians below. For the following main force, the task was simplified: fly a steady course and drop bombs directly into the center of the pre-marked zone of light. This system effectively transferred the most difficult part of the mission, navigation, from the entire bomber fleet to a select few experts. The concentration of bombs immediately improved, with a far greater percentage of the ordnance now hitting the intended industrial and military targets. The German commanders who had previously scoffed were suddenly faced with irrefutable evidence of a successful and organized American night attack. The accuracy achieved was a shock to the German air defense system, which had grown accustomed to the scattered, ineffective raids of the past. The flares were not merely markers, they were a symbol of the American technological and doctrinal mastery over the darkness. This new reality forced the immediate and costly diversion of German resources to counter a threat they had fatally underestimated for years. The sudden, devastating accuracy of the concentrated night attack sent a shockwave through the German High Command. Reports of massive damage to critical industrial sites, previously untouched by American night raids, began to flood headquarters. The complacency that had characterized the early war dissolved into a frantic, high-priority scramble to understand the new threat. Intelligence officers quickly deduced that the Americans had successfully integrated radar and the British Pathfinder concept into their own operations. The sight of a city clearly illuminated by multiple colors of flares signaled a level of organization and coordination that defied their earlier dismissals. German factory output was immediately and noticeably impacted in the target areas, confirming the strategic success of the new tactic. The psychological effect on German civilians was also immense, as the randomness of earlier bombing was replaced by targeted, focused destruction. German commanders realized their night fighter and anti-aircraft defenses were dangerously misaligned and insufficient to cope with the precision-guided attacks. They had gambled that the USAF would stick to its rigid daylight doctrine, and they had lost that gamble decisively. The emergency required diverting precious resources, including experienced night fighter pilots and radar equipment, away from other critical fronts. This belated effort was a testament to the effectiveness of the Pathfinders, who had successfully pulled the rug out from under the German air defense strategy. The shift from scoffing to desperation defined the moment the German command truly understood the existential threat posed by the American bombers. The German response to the Pathfinder threat was a desperate but well-executed scramble to bolster their night defense network. Existing night fighter units were immediately augmented and tasked with intercepting the concentrated bomber streams over the illuminated cities. The Luftwaffe focused on integrating new radar and homing equipment into their night fighter aircraft to counter the American electronic advantage. New tactics were quickly developed, including the wild boar method, which involved visually searching for targets in the illuminated city glow. Another technique, tame boar, relied on ground-controlled interception, guiding fighters toward the bomber stream identified by radar. However, the sheer volume of American bombers and the effectiveness of the Pathfinder's marking system often overwhelmed these defenses. The Pathfinders themselves were a primary target, and attacking the lead aircraft became a high-priority mission for the German pilots. The American escort fighters, once they gained sufficient range, also began to participate in night operations, further complicating the German defensive efforts. The introduction of specialized bomber countermeasures, such as chaff, strips of aluminum foil, was used to confuse and jam German ground and air radar. This electronic cat-and-mouse game significantly reduced the effectiveness of the German night fighters and increased their casualty rates. Despite the bravery and skill of the German night fighter pilots, they were constantly reacting to an evolving and technologically superior Allied offense. The defense became a costly, draining effort that could only slow, but never stop, the relentless pace of the illuminated night campaign. The American Pathfinder force left an indelible legacy on the history of strategic bombing and modern air warfare. Their success fundamentally validated the principle of specialized, advanced navigation as the key to successful night operations. By overcoming the limitations of darkness and weather, they ensured the continuity and relentlessness of the Allied bombing campaign. The Pathfinders transformed the 8th Air Force from a fair-weather, daylight-only operation into a 24-hour, all-weather military machine. This constant pressure, day and night, stretched the German resources past their breaking point, crippling industrial and transport networks. The lessons learned in electronic warfare, radar-guided targeting, and crew specialization were absorbed into military aviation for decades to come. The airmen who served in these elite units performed some of the most dangerous and consequential missions of the entire European conflict. They were the true innovators who blended British ingenuity with American resources and technological capacity. Their ability to light up Germany effectively ended the German commander's complacency and forced a costly, impossible defense. The Pathfinders proved that no target was safe, and no amount of darkness could truly hide the strategic heart of the Reich. Their efforts directly contributed to the destruction of the German war machine and the ultimate success of the Allied forces. The dramatic shift from scattered, ignored bombs to devastating, concentrated strike stands as a powerful testament to military adaptation and technological superiority.